Hello and welcome to the channel. So recently I created an official, what I'm calling the definitive Goblins Keep Coming guide. And if you're unfamiliar with this tower defense game, in my opinion, and with a lot of experience, over a decade of experience in tower defense games, is arguably one of the best designed tower defense games I've ever played, as well as one of the most difficult tower defense games I've ever played. Now, the graphics quality is low in comparison to some, but I think when it comes to tower defense, that's not necessarily a big deal for me, at least when I'm analyzing it. So we'll just jump right into the guide. I wanted to do an overview of the guide, and honestly, I don't even know how many people play this game, but more people need to. And if you're unfamiliar with tower defense games, they challenge, hopefully, your critical thinking skills, your whatever part of your brain plays chess is in my opinion, the same part of your brain that plays tower defense games. So I laid out 4 basic principles to Goblins Keep Coming, and I think if you can perfect these 4 principles, you can beat this game. So in the beginning of Goblins Keep Coming, and this is the first principle, tower placement is one of the most important aspects of gameplay, especially in the early waves. This becomes less important as your towers start to scale and really are able to handle mobs without necessarily being placed optimally. But your initial tower placement is extremely important. We'll get into exactly what that tower placement needs to be. So, 2, upgrading the right towers at the right time is absolutely critical if you want to get past wave 30. A lot of people make the mistake of placing a lot of towers that go unupgraded, and they end up wasting all their money on doing this, and they end up leaking by wave 11. I've seen in the comments 11, 15, 20, because they're not upgrading properly. They think that more towers means a better strategy, which is not true. And the third principle that I've laid out is mine placement and your timing with your mine placement. So I'm not sure exactly what everyone's philosophy is on mine placement, but what I've found to be successful is that as soon as you can place a mine, you need to be placing mines and getting that passive income. So every tower defense game has a passive income mechanism. Typically, you get this at the end of every wave. You kill all the mobs or you survive the wave, you get a heap of cash at the end of the wave. In Goblins Keep Coming, this is not a mechanic that they utilize. Instead, they have a mine system where you actually have to invest in the mine and then yield those dividends, and you start earning money after the 5th wave of having a tower. It pays itself off in 4 waves, and then you start earning actually on the 5th wave. So mine placement's really important in timing with that. And the 4th and the final principle is understanding how the wave number in Goblins Keep Coming relates to the introduction of harder mobs. This is vital to knowing how you place towers, upgrade towers, where you're placing and upgrading towers. And this is where really the reason this game, I think, is so well designed and is so difficult, consequently, is because of the balance of how you spend your gold in each of the 4 quadrants. So, for example, if you spend too much gold in one of the quadrants, you will lose your castle to another quadrant that you maybe did not give or invest enough time into and money into. So these 4 principles I've given sort of a 2 at least. I've given these more time. So tower placement and upgrading towers. This is kind of a philosophical question with tower defense, but tower placement and tower upgrades are literally the most important aspect to every tower defense game. You have to figure out whether this tower defense, values more towers or less towers with upgrades to them. And in the early game of tower defenses, this is critical. So some tower defense games, you want a lot of the basic tower right off the bat. Some tower defense games, you can get away with having 1 tower with a lot of upgrades. And other games like Goblins, you have to kind of pace yourself a little bit, which makes it, again, very challenging. And the reason that you have to have really good tower placement in Goblins Keep Coming is because of the pathing. So the the mobs increment at a predictable pace. Every 10 waves, you get an increase in power of the mobs that are coming through, the creeps that are coming through. However, the pathing of those mobs is actually RNG. It's the only RNG factor of this game, which means that your tower placement could actually be good in one run and bad in another. Now, the margin of error there is actually very small, though. So likely the consequence of having bad power, or the same tower placement, the consequence of the RNG will be very minimal, if anything. In fact, you'll oftentimes maybe leak one mob that you didn't before, and if that does happen, you can just restart and really just call it a freak RNG accident, or you can build a tower by your castle and clean up whatever mob leaked. Anyway, that's the only real RNG to this game. So if you figure out a good strategy, stick with the strategy. Don't change your strategy necessarily based on the RNG of the mob pathing. And that's why placement matters, because you have to place your towers in such a way that can actually account for this RNG. So timing your upgrades is also very, very, very important. Knowing when to upgrade, how to upgrade, and in general, with Goblins Keep Coming, whatever you do in one quadrant, you can replicate in another. And I'll explain that in a second. So let's just go through the grasslands. I'm just going to walk through my guide. So the grasslands I would consider the second hardest zone in this game. Excuse me, I had to get a drink. So it's also the most important. So while it's not as difficult as the snowlands, it is the most important. And that is because if you fail here, you fail everywhere else. Simple as that. If you spend too much money in the grasslands, you won't have enough money for the snowlands. If you leak in the grasslands, usually, unless you have some sort of tower set up over here, you're going to lose based on your leak in the grasslands. Whereas the snowlands, and we'll go into this in a second, that usually isn't the case. So the biggest mistake I have seen people make based on screenshots and video gameplay of this game is that they build more than 4 towers for the first 35 waves in the grasslands. You only need 4 towers here, period. If you build more, you're going to be spending too much money, and you actually will not be successful in this game. So that's all I'm going to say about the grasslands. Really go and get the guide if you want more information on the grasslands. So for tower upgrades, I generally try to wait until the mobs get kind of right here where my towers are having trouble killing them, then I start upgrading. It's kind of a general philosophy I follow. As soon as I'm having trouble picking off the last mob, upgrade right away. So the snowlands is by far the most difficult quadrant. So this is partially due to the fact that there's mobs coming from both sides. And the biggest mistake I made early on, about, for the first 30 or 40 hours I invested in the game, I was building 2 sets of tower setups because that's how I've done it in other tower defense games, and it works. With Goblins Keep Coming in the early and mid game, you are very starved for resources. So this is very inefficient, and I've recommended this particular setup as a result. And this will carry you into the mid game. So the best strategy, hands down, for the snowlands is essentially kind of tied to the grasslands. You build 4 towers in the grasslands, and then you start building your towers in the snowlands, and that is how you have to do it. The principle of upgrading your towers is essentially it's 2x. Whatever you upgrade in the grasslands, you upgrade times 2 in the snowlands. So for volcanoes, basically, once you get your strategy down for snowlands and grasslands, you can do volcanoes very easily. Same with the desert. Tower placement isn't exactly all that important in the volcanoes. As you can see here, I do 4 here and 4 here, and the general principle is this tower can hit both sides, which is helpful, especially in the early game, less important in the mid game and the late game. It also helps with the Goblin King. If the Goblin King comes from the right side, you have a little bit of an advantage, and if the Tower King comes from the left side, you're still fine. So this choke point is actually probably the most important end game choke point, if you make it that far. And then finally, the desert is by far the easiest. I mean, really, you can kind of build towers and forget about it. So with gold mines, so I've kind of given an overview of the general strategy, at least tower placement, which is where most people struggle. If you follow the tower placement that I've set up here, you can make it to mid game. End game, there's a little bit more trickery involved, and maybe I'll talk about that at the end of the video. So gold mines are kind of, I mean, really I talked about this in the introduction of the video, but it's passive income essentially with a little bit of a twist in that you have to build the passive income like a farm or something like that. Your location of your mines really doesn't matter, but the timing is. You need to have that as soon as you can build your mine, you need to. If you miss one wave of having your mine giving you that 50 gold, then you're actually at a disadvantage because you won't start earning from that mine until 6 waves after you should be earning from that mine. So this is probably the most frustrating component of the game, is surviving into the mid game, and then the second most frustrating is surviving into the end game if you make it there. So the Snowlands is the most important quadrant into understanding how you make it to mid game. This is because you don't actually have to change you don't really have to build any more towers once you initially set things up. The only thing you need to add to your Snowlands is 1 tower. That's a frost tower, and that'll carry you well into mid game. Now, once you set up your Snowlands setup, you kind of just forget about it for a long time, which allows you to bolster the grasslands. And this is the key to beating Goblins Keep Coming. If you can set up the Snowlands to essentially be good to go and self-sustaining for 10, 15, 20 waves, then you can save up for a level 3 tower in your grasslands and beat the game. So once you've set up your Snowlands for the mid game, there's 2 options. You can either build several 2 to 4 level 2 towers and upgrade them all the way, or, this is a strategy I prefer, saving up and building a level 3 tower in the grasslands quadrant by wave 60. It's very risky because you're not going to be spending gold for probably 5 or 6 waves. So you have to have a good strategy. You have to have a good setup. But once you do this, you have beaten the game. Because then you can just save up, build a level 3 tower in the Snowlands, and then rinse and repeat. If you can successfully set up level 3 towers in Snowlands and Grasslands, then Volcanoes and Desert are easy peasy. Now, one last note, and this is where I'll end the video on, is probably the philosophy behind repairing your castle. So this is a very tempting feature, but a very useless feature in my opinion. It's a good idea, right? Repair your castle so you can survive longer. But because of the nature of this game being so critical in early and mid-game planning, any amount of gold you spend on repairing your castle in the early and mid-game will certainly be a huge detriment to your strategy. Because you're going to be so starved for gold in the early and mid-game, any amount of gold you spend on repairing your castle is less gold you have to upgrade a tower, which will ultimately just cause you to wipe. It'll cause your castle to be destroyed. So I recommend not repairing your castle ever. You have a second chance. So if you have to repair your castle, it's better just to start over. So in short, repairing your castle is double bad. First, the reason that your castle was damaged is because you didn't strategize well enough. And then most of the time, they're the fast exploding mobs, and so you don't earn gold for them. That's gold lost. So you have gold lost, and that's the first one. And second, you're spending gold to fix a problem that you didn't earn gold for. So it's double the problem. You're losing gold on 2 accounts there instead of upgrading towers. So it's better just to restart and fix the problem as to why you leaked, because most leaks happen in the early and mid game when it's less consequential to just start over. And that's, as a side note, that's one of the most difficult part of this game is that once you get into mid game and you can make it into mid game successfully, you're looking at 30 minutes or so of your time to tinker with what went wrong. And that's what I liked about this game, is that you actually have to invest a lot of time min-maxing in the early game to understand why you were failing in the mid game, and min-max in the mid game to try to understand why you were failing in the late game. So this has just been a walkthrough of my guide, hopefully some helpful information. I don't even know how many people play this game, but if you stumble upon it, go and look at my guide. It's under the community guide. It's the second one, calling the definitive Goblins Keep Coming guide. I provide my tower placement for early game, which will carry you into mid game. So, for example, this is my snowlands, grasslands, my volcano setup, and my desert setup. If you just set those up and upgrade them all the way at the appropriate timing, you will make it to mid game. And follow the guide, of course. So hopefully this has been helpful for people that have struggled with this game and only really made it into wave 11, 12. I've made it. I think I'm number 4 or 3 on the leaderboard now, but essentially once you get to, I think it's like wave 150 or something like that, the waves stop getting harder. So the people with thousands of waves literally probably just kept their computer idle for a few weeks and let the game just kind of, so for leaderboard purposes. So that being said, hopefully this guide's been helpful. Hopefully you have enjoyed it, and I've stayed somewhat brief, but enjoy the game. If you haven't picked it up, it's really cheap on Steam. One of the if you liked Defense Grid, if you liked Warcraft, 3 custom TD games, I think you'll like this, and I recommend everybody get it. I hope the developer at some point revisits this project. It doesn't seem like that's the case, because the last time he really was active about this was in 2017. But I have a lot of cool ideas for how this game could be improved upon. A few bug fixes, a few quality of life things. But this is by far my favorite tower defense game that I've ever played. So maybe the developer will see this and reach out to me. And because I literally, I've played through Defense Grid like 4 times now, and I'm tired of it. I would love content like Goblins Keep Coming, more content like it. That would be awesome. All right, well, thanks for watching, and hopefully this has been helpful for those that want to play the game or are stuck, and we'll see you next time.